The delicate pink wheelchair cast a shadow beneath the ancient oak, isolated from the symphony of children's voices that danced across Riverside Park's golden afternoon light. 7-year-old Olivia Sterling's fingers traced invisible patterns on her silk dress, blue eyes following every carefree movement she could no longer make. 20 feet away, laughter sparkled like sunlight on water. Her mother's pristine BMW hummed in the parking lot. Another boardroom crisis stealing another Sunday. Lucas Martinez felt his daughter Zoe's swing slow to a gentle stop, her tender gaze drawn to the solitary figure whose designer world couldn't mask the ache of profound loneliness. The October breeze whispered through amber leaves, carrying the bittersweet perfume of autumn and unspoken yearning. Zoe's small hand found her father's weathered palm, squeezing with the intuitive urgency only innocent hearts possess. "Daddy, why does that pretty girl look so lonely?" Lucas studied the heartbreaking tableau: wealth without warmth, protection without connection, a child imprisoned by invisible walls. In that crystalline moment, he chose compassion over caution. "My daughter would love to play with you." Mike Torres wiped grease from his weathered hands with the same red rag he'd used for 15 years at Morrison's garage. Through the chain-link fence that separated the auto shop from Cedar Falls Elementary, he watched Lucas Martinez walk his daughter to the school gates every morning at exactly 7:45. No mother ever appeared in that daily ritual. No grandmother dropping off forgotten lunchboxes or signing permission slips. Just a father whose calloused hand spoke of late nights under car hoods, and a daughter whose bright smile never questioned why their family looked different from the others. Mike had seen enough broken families roll through his garage doors to recognize the quiet strength it took to hold everything together alone. Lucas worked harder than any man had a right to, never complained when Saturday overtime meant missing Zoe's soccer games, never asked for advances when the electric bill ran late. The kid Zoe, she had something special about her. Not the entitled restlessness Mike saw in other children, but a gentle curiosity that made her stop to pet stray cats and wave at elderly neighbors. Today, Mike noticed something different in Lucas's step as he returned from the school drop-off. Something lighter, like a man who'd just discovered he wasn't carrying his burden alone anymore. The autumn sun slanted through Morrison's grimy windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor where Lucas methodically organized his tools. Each wrench found its designated place, each socket arranged by size. The careful precision of a man who'd learned that small acts of order could hold chaos at bay. His phone buzzed against the metal workbench, Zoe's school number flashing on the cracked screen. His stomach clenched with the familiar dread that every single parent knows, the fear that something has gone wrong and you're not there to fix it. "Mr. Martinez, this is Mrs. Chen from the office. Zoe is fine, but she's been asking about a little girl she met at the park yesterday. She wants to know if she can invite her to our fall festival next weekend." Lucas exhaled slowly, remembering the pink wheelchair and the careful way Olivia had asked permission before touching Zoe's sandbox toys. "What little girl?" he asked, though he already knew. The memory of Victoria Sterling's sharp suit and sharper eyes was burned into his mind like a warning label he couldn't quite read. Victoria Sterling's reflection stared back from the bathroom mirror of Sterling Dynamics' executive washroom, her platinum blonde hair still perfectly arranged despite the 14-hour day that had just ended. The building's 42nd floor offered a panoramic view of Portland's glittering skyline, but Victoria found herself thinking about sandbox castles and the way her daughter's face had lit up for the first time in months. Her assistant had rescheduled 3 board meetings, delayed 2 conference calls, and deflected a dozen urgent emails, all because Victoria couldn't stop replaying the sound of Olivia's genuine laughter echoing across Riverside Park. The annual Sterling Dynamics Charity Gala was 3 weeks away, where Portland's elite would write generous checks and pat themselves on the back for their philanthropy. Yet here was her own daughter, starving for something money couldn't buy: simple human connection. Victoria's phone displayed 17 missed calls from her mother-in-law, each one undoubtedly filled with passive-aggressive inquiries about Olivia's progress and thinly veiled criticisms about Victoria's parenting choices. She deleted them all without listening, grabbed her Hermes bag, and headed for the elevator. Tonight, she would ask Olivia about the park. Tonight, she would listen. The Sterling mansion's marble foyer echoed with Victoria's Louboutin heels as she climbed the curved staircase toward Olivia's room. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighted down by the knowledge that she'd missed another bedtime story, another chance to hear about her daughter's day. Olivia's private nurse, Mrs. Patterson, emerged from the child's bedroom with a gentle smile that somehow managed to convey both understanding and judgment. "She's been asking for you all evening, Mrs. Sterling. Had a wonderful day, from what I can tell. Something about making a new friend?" Victoria's chest tightened. In the 2 years since Richard's death, Olivia had barely interacted with other children, too shy and self-conscious about her wheelchair to engage in the messy, complicated world of childhood friendships. The physical therapy sessions, the occupational therapy, the expensive private tutors, none of it had brought back the sparkle in her daughter's eyes that Victoria remembered from before the accident. But one afternoon in a public park with a stranger's child had accomplished what millions of dollars in specialized care could not. Victoria knocked softly on Olivia's door, steeling herself for another conversation about why Mommy worked so much and when Daddy was coming home. Olivia's bedroom resembled a medical facility more than a child sanctuary, with its hospital-grade bed, specialized equipment, and sterile white walls adorned with educational posters about spinal cord injuries. But tonight, scattered across the adjustable bedside table, were crayons and construction paper art supplies that hadn't been touched in months. Olivia looked up from her drawing with eyes that held a brightness Victoria hadn't seen since before their world shattered. "Mommy! Look what I made for Zoe!" The drawing showed 2 stick figures holding hands next to what appeared to be a very ambitious sandbox castle, complete with flags and a moat. One figure stood on 2 legs, the other sat in a carefully detailed pink wheelchair. "Who's Zoe, sweetheart?" Victoria asked, though her chest already knew the answer would somehow change everything. "My new best friend. Her daddy said she would love to play with me. And he was right. We built the most amazing castle, and she didn't ask about my legs even once. She just wanted to know if I liked unicorns." Olivia's words tumbled out in a rush of excitement, each sentence hitting Victoria like a revelation. This was how children were supposed to sound. Breathless with possibility, not careful with their words. 6 weeks passed like a slow-motion car crash Victoria couldn't prevent. Every morning, Olivia asked about returning to the park. Every evening, Victoria invented new excuses about scheduling conflicts and weather concerns. The truth was more complicated than a 7-year-old could understand. Victoria Sterling had built her life on control, on carefully managed variables and risk assessments that kept her daughter safe from a world that had already taken too much. The private tutors continued their lessons in the sterile comfort of the mansion's converted classroom. The physical therapy sessions proceeded on schedule in the climate-controlled home gym. Olivia's nutrition remained perfectly balanced, her medical care impeccable, her security absolute. But the light in her eyes dimmed a little more each day, and the artwork featuring two stick figures gradually disappeared from her bedside table. Dr. Martinez, no relation to the man from the park, Victoria had checked, expressed concern about Olivia's recent loss of appetite and increased lethargy during their monthly consultation. Sometimes isolation can manifest as depression in pediatric patients, he'd mentioned casually, writing yet another prescription Victoria knew wouldn't solve the real problem. Mrs. Patterson had grown increasingly vocal about Olivia's need for social interaction, suggesting playdates and preschool programs with thinly veiled disapproval. The call came on a Thursday evening while Victoria reviewed quarterly projections in her home office. Olivia's voice through the intercom was smaller than usual, fragile in a way that made Victoria's hands shake as she reached for the phone. "Mommy, can you come upstairs? I don't feel very good." Victoria found her daughter curled up in the oversized hospital bed, the untouched dinner tray on the nightstand telling its own story. Olivia's face was pale against the white pillows, her breathing shallow with exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical exertion. "I keep dreaming about the park," Olivia whispered, "about Zoe and the castle we built." "Do you think she remembers me?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, forcing Victoria to confront the truth she'd been avoiding. In her desperate attempt to protect her daughter from the world's cruelty, she'd created a different kind of prison. Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway with medication and a concerned expression that spoke volumes about conversations she'd had with Olivia's medical team. "Perhaps it's time to consider some social opportunities," she said gently, her Scottish accent softening the implied criticism. "The child is withering away, and it's not from any physical ailment." Victoria looked at her daughter's drawing supplies, still untouched on the desk, and made a decision that terrified her more than any board meeting ever had. Victoria's black BMW navigated Cedar Falls' middle-class neighborhoods with the uncertainty of expensive GPS encountering unfamiliar territory. The houses here were smaller, older, with chain-link fences and practical driveways instead of circular drives and manicured hedges. Children's bicycles leaned against front porches. Halloween decorations began their early appearance on modest lawns, and the whole neighborhood hummed with the comfortable chaos of families who actually lived in their homes instead of simply existing in them. Morrison's garage occupied the corner lot, its hand-painted sign weathered but welcoming, grease stains on the concrete telling stories of honest work and satisfied customers. Victoria parked beside a rusted pickup truck and tried to remember the last time she'd set foot in a place that smelled of motor oil and authenticity. Through the open bay doors, she could see Lucas Martinez bent over an engine, his concentration absolute, work-worn hands moving with the confidence of a man who understood how broken things could be fixed. She'd practiced this conversation during the 20-minute drive, rehearsing explanations and justifications for keeping their daughters apart for 6 weeks. But now, faced with the reality of asking for help, all her carefully planned words seemed inadequate. Lucas looked up from the Chevy's stubborn carburetor when the expensive heels clicked against the garage's concrete floor. Olivia Sterling stood framed in the afternoon sunlight, her designer suit looking as out of place as a champagne flute at a tailgate party. 6 weeks had passed since the park encounter, long enough for him to convince himself it had been a one-time moment of connection in an otherwise carefully controlled world. But here she was, her perfectly composed expression unable to hide something that looked almost like desperation. "Mr. Martinez, I hope I'm not interrupting your work," she began, her voice carrying the polished authority of boardroom presentations. "I need to speak with you about our daughters." Lucas wiped his hands on his coveralls, noting the way her eyes moved nervously around the garage, taking in the organized chaos of automotive life. "Is Olivia all right?" he asked, and the genuine concern in his voice seemed to catch Victoria off guard. Her composure cracked slightly, revealing something vulnerable underneath all that careful polish. "No," she admitted, the word escaping before she could stop it. "She's not all right. And I think I'm the reason why." The conversation that followed would replay in Lucas's mind for months afterward, each word carrying weight he hadn't expected from a woman whose life seemed to exist in a completely different universe. Victoria spoke about isolation and protection, about the careful balance between keeping Olivia safe and allowing her to live. She described the gradual dimming of her daughter's spirit, the untouched meals and sleepless nights, the way Olivia asked about Zoe, with the heartbreaking hope of a child who'd tasted friendship and found it irreplaceable. "I built walls," Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought they would keep the bad things out, but they're keeping everything out, including joy." Lucas leaned against his workbench, studying this woman who commanded corporate empires, but couldn't figure out how to make her daughter smile. "Kids are resilient," he offered. "But they need room to breathe, room to fail, room to discover who they are when nobody's watching." But Victoria's laugh held no humor. "Easy for you to say. You haven't watched your child nearly die in a hospital bed, haven't had to explain why Daddy isn't coming home, haven't had to make decisions that determine whether she'll ever walk again." The words hung between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. Saturday morning arrived with October's crisp promise of changing seasons and second chances. Lucas helped Zoe pack her small backpack with sandbox toys and the special juice boxes she insisted Olivia would love. His daughter's excitement infectious, despite his own nervousness about returning to the Sterling mansion. The drive through Pine Hill Estate felt like entering a different country, where lawns were professionally maintained and driveways could accommodate small aircraft. The Sterling house rose from manicured grounds like something from an architectural magazine, all clean lines and expensive materials designed to impress rather than welcome. But it was Olivia who answered the door, her face lighting up with pure joy when she saw Zoe standing on the marble steps. "You came back," she exclaimed, and for a moment the mansion's cold grandeur couldn't compete with the warmth of genuine childhood friendship. Victoria appeared behind her daughter, dressed more casually than Lucas had ever seen her, though even her weekend clothes probably cost more than his monthly salary. "Thank you for coming," she said, and the simple phrase carried the weight of admission that she needed help with the most important job in the world. The Sterling mansion's interior looked like a museum exhibit titled "How Rich People Live," but Olivia navigated its marble floors and designer furniture with the unconscious grace of someone who'd never known anything different. Victoria led them to what she called the family room, though the space felt more like a hotel lobby than a place where actual families gathered. Zoe's eyes widened at the room's sheer size, taking in the vaulted ceilings and artwork that probably cost more than most people's cars. But children adapt with remarkable speed, and within minutes both girls were settled on the expensive Persian rug, Olivia's wheelchair positioned so she could reach the elaborate dollhouse that dominated one corner of the room. "This is the biggest house I've ever seen," Zoe announced with the brutal honesty of childhood. "Do you get lost in here sometimes?" Olivia giggled, the sound echoing off the high ceilings like music the room had been waiting to hear. "Sometimes I pretend I'm exploring a castle," she admitted. "But it gets lonely being the only princess." Lucas caught Victoria's expression out of the corner of his eye, something between pride and heartbreak, as she watched her daughter interact with someone who saw past the wheelchair to the child underneath. The transformation in Olivia over the following hours was nothing short of miraculous. The shy, careful child who'd answered the door gradually disappeared, replaced by a chattering, giggling 7-year-old who showed Zoe her art supplies, her book collection, and the indoor swimming pool designed specifically for her physical therapy. "I can't swim in regular pools," Olivia explained matter-of-factly as they stood beside the temperature-controlled water. "But this one has special handles and a lift, so I can go in whenever I want." Zoe studied the mechanical equipment with the serious consideration she usually reserved for complicated math problems. "That's actually pretty cool," she decided. "It's like having your own private water park?" Victoria watched from the observation window as both girls splashed in the therapeutic pool, their laughter creating ripples that spread far beyond the water's surface. For the first time in 2 years, the pool was being used for joy instead of medical necessity. Mrs. Patterson appeared beside Victoria with towels and something that might have been approval. "Children have a remarkable ability to find happiness in any circumstance," the nurse observed quietly. "But they can't do it alone." Lucas found himself unexpectedly comfortable in Victoria's pristine kitchen, accepting coffee from a machine that probably cost more than his car while watching 2 little girls turn a simple snack time into an elaborate tea party. The Sterling kitchen was a monument to culinary possibility, commercial-grade appliances, marble countertops, and enough space to cater a small wedding. Yet it felt oddly sterile, like a showroom rather than the heart of a home where families gathered for morning cereal and late-night conversations. "I don't cook much," Victoria admitted, following his gaze around the immaculate space. "Mrs. Patterson handles most of Olivia's meals, and I usually eat at the office." The confession carried more weight than a simple statement about meal preparation. It was an admission of how disconnected she'd become from the basic rhythms of family life. "Zoe and I cook together every Sunday," Lucas offered. "Nothing fancy, but she likes helping with pancakes and scrambled eggs. Says it makes the food taste better when you make it yourself." Victoria's expression suggested this was a revolutionary concept, and Lucas realized that in trying to give Olivia everything money could buy, she'd forgotten the simple pleasures that didn't require a credit card. The afternoon shadows were growing longer when Victoria made her decision. Watching Olivia and Zoe collaborate on an elaborate art project, their heads bent together over construction paper and glitter, she felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the tight control she'd maintained for 2 years. "What if," she said to Lucas, her voice carefully casual, "Olivia came to your house next time? Just for a few hours." The words felt dangerous leaving her mouth, like jumping off a cliff without knowing if there was water below. Lucas looked up from the magazine he'd been pretending to read, recognizing the courage it took for Victoria to make such an offer. "Our place isn't anything like this," he warned gently. "It's small, nothing fancy. Zoe has to share a bathroom with me, and sometimes the neighbor's music gets loud." Victoria glanced around her perfect house, beautiful, safe, and utterly devoid of the easy warmth she'd witnessed in Lucas's interactions with both daughters. "Maybe that's exactly what she needs," she said, and for the first time since the accident, Victoria Sterling chose trust over control. The following Saturday brought unseasonably warm weather and Olivia's first visit to a world where luxury meant having 2 flavors of ice cream in the freezer, and designer furniture came from garage sales. Lucas's house on Maple Street was everything the Sterling mansion wasn't. Compact, lived in, and filled with the comfortable clutter of real life. Zoe had spent the entire week preparing for Olivia's visit, cleaning her room and planning activities that would work with a wheelchair. The front steps posed their first challenge, but Lucas had installed a temporary ramp using plywood and determination, while neighbors Mr. and Mrs. Chen offered enthusiastic waves from their adjoining porch. "It's so cozy," Olivia breathed as she rolled through the front door, taking in the mismatched furniture and family photographs that covered every available surface. The house smelled like cinnamon and coffee, like breakfast lingered long after the dishes were done. Victoria followed behind, her expression carefully neutral as she absorbed the casual intimacy of a home where life actually happened. Toys occupied corners that should have been pristine, dishes sat in the sink awaiting attention, and the whole place hummed with the messy authenticity she'd forgotten existed. Zoe's bedroom was a 7-year-old's paradise bunk beds she'd insisted on despite sleeping alone, glow-in-the-dark stars scattered across the ceiling, and a collection of stuffed animals that had witnessed every important moment of her young life. "I gave them all names and personalities," Zoe explained as she introduced Olivia to her menagerie. "Mr. Buttons is the serious one, and Fluffy is always getting into trouble." Olivia reached out tentatively to touch a well-worn rabbit with one ear partially detached. "They look like they've been hugged a lot," she observed wistfully. In her sterile bedroom at home, even her few stuffed animals remained pristine and untouched, more decoration than companion. Victoria stood in the doorway, watching her daughter experience childhood the way it was meant to be. Messy, warm, and full of possibilities that didn't require batteries or assembly instructions. "She can take Mr. Buttons home if she wants," Zoe offered, with the generous spontaneity of childhood. "He's really good at keeping nightmares away." The simple kindness of the gesture hit Victoria like a physical blow, reminding her of all the organic connections she'd missed while orchestrating Olivia's carefully controlled life. The kitchen became the afternoon's headquarters, where Lucas introduced both girls to the ancient art of making chocolate chip cookies from scratch. Olivia approached the task with scientific precision, measuring flour and sugar with the careful attention she usually reserved for physical therapy exercises. Zoe, meanwhile, treated baking like performance art, flour dusting her cheeks and chocolate chips disappearing at an alarming rate before they could reach the mixing bowl. "The secret ingredient is not following the recipe exactly," Lucas confided, winking at Olivia as he added an extra handful of chips. "Baking is about heart, not mathematics." Victoria watched from the breakfast nook, marveling at how naturally Lucas included Olivia in every step, adjusting counter heights and finding creative solutions for tasks that required standing. There were no special accommodations or careful modifications, just adaptive problem-solving that treated Olivia's wheelchair as simply another factor to consider, like lefty scissors or step stools. When the first batch emerged golden and fragrant from the oven, Olivia's face glowed with pride that no amount of money could have purchased. "I made these," she announced to her mother, holding up a slightly lopsided cookie like it was the Hope Diamond. The transformation Lucas witnessed in Victoria over the following weeks was subtle but unmistakable. She began arriving to pick up Olivia 15 minutes early, lingering in the kitchen while the girls finished their activities, asking questions about grocery shopping and normal bedtimes, and whether 7-year-olds really needed to eat vegetables at every meal. Her perfectly pressed business suits gave way to more casual attire on weekends, though even her relaxed clothes probably cost more than Lucas's monthly grocery budget. "How do you do it?" she asked one afternoon, watching him guide both girls through the complex negotiations required to build a blanket fort. "Make everything look so easy." Lucas paused in his architectural consulting. Apparently the fort required better structural support, according to Chief Engineer Zoe. "I don't think about it much," he admitted. "Zoe needed normal after her mom died, so we figured out normal together. Some days we fail spectacularly, but we keep trying." Victoria absorbed this like someone learning a foreign language, each simple phrase containing concepts she'd never considered. The idea that failure could be part of success, that imperfection might actually be the goal. These notions challenged everything she'd built her life around. Cedar Falls Elementary's Fall Festival arrived with perfect October weather and Victoria Sterling's first experience attending a public school event. The gymnasium had been transformed into a harvest wonderland, complete with hay bales, pumpkin displays, and enough orange construction paper to deforest a small county. Parents milled around in comfortable clusters, their easy familiarity a stark contrast to the formal networking events Victoria usually attended, where conversations followed predictable scripts about market trends and stock portfolios. Olivia wore her favorite purple dress and a genuine smile as she navigated the crowded space, Zoe beside her serving as both tour guide and social coordinator. "That's Mrs. Henderson. She teaches art," Zoe explained, introducing Olivia to various adults with the confidence of a seasoned diplomat. "And Mr. Kim runs the library. He knows about every book ever written." Victoria trailed behind, feeling like an anthropologist studying a culture she'd forgotten existed. These parents discussed carpool schedules and homework battles with the weary affection of people fighting the same daily wars. They wore jeans and sneakers, their conversations peppered with children's names and weekend plans that didn't require personal assistance to coordinate. The evening's entertainment included a cakewalk, a ring toss, and something called a friendship booth, where children could make bracelets for their classmates. Olivia wheeled up to the craft table with determined enthusiasm, her fingers working carefully to thread beads onto elastic string. "This one's for Zoe," she announced, holding up a creation in purple and blue. "And this one's for Kevin. He sits next to me in art class." Victoria realized with a start that her daughter was casually mentioning friendships she knew nothing about, relationships that had developed in the few weeks since Olivia started attending school 3 days a week. "Who's Kevin?" she asked, and Olivia's face lit up with the joy of having stories to tell. "He's really good at drawing dinosaurs, and he never asks about my wheelchair. Yesterday he said I should join the art club because I'm better at painting than anyone else in 2nd grade. Each revelation hit Victoria like evidence of a parallel universe where her daughter existed as a complete person, not just a medical case study requiring constant supervision. Mrs. Patterson had been right. Olivia was withering in isolation, but she was blooming in community. The crisis came on a Tuesday evening when Victoria received a call that would change everything. Dr. Martinez's voice carried urgency as he explained Olivia's latest test results. Significant regression in muscle strength, decreased appetite, and symptoms that suggested clinical depression in a 7-year-old child. The physical decline isn't related to her spinal injury, he explained carefully. This appears to be psychological manifestation of social isolation. Children need peer interaction for healthy development, Mrs. Sterling. Olivia is literally lonely to the point of illness. Victoria sat in her office overlooking Portland's skyline, watching lights twinkle in thousands of windows that represented thousands of families probably eating dinner together at that very moment. She'd built Sterling Dynamics into a technology empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but she couldn't figure out how to make her daughter want to eat. "What do you recommend?" she asked, though something in her chest already knew the answer would require surrendering the control that had become her religion. "Full-time school enrollment, Doctor," Martinez said without hesitation. "Regular playdates, extracurricular activities, and as much normal childhood interaction as possible. Olivia needs to be a kid, not a patient." The prescription was simple, terrifying, and everything Victoria had spent 2 years trying to avoid. Victoria found Lucas in Morrison's garage that evening, his concentration focused on rebuilding an engine with meditative precision. The familiar sense of motor oil and honest work seemed to calm something inside her that board meetings and profit reports couldn't touch. "We need to talk," she said, her voice carrying none of its usual executive authority. Lucas looked up from the dismantled carburetor, noting the careful way Victoria held herself, like someone trying not to shatter. "Olivia's doctor says she needs full-time school and regular social interaction," Victoria continued, the words tumbling out faster than she intended. "He says isolation is making her sick, actually, physically sick, and I don't know how to fix it." The admission cost her everything she'd built her identity around. Control, competence, the ability to solve problems through careful planning, and unlimited resources. "I've been protecting her from the world," she whispered, "but I think I've been protecting her from life." Lucas set down his wrench, his grease-stained hands somehow conveying more comfort than all of Victoria's expensive therapy sessions combined. "Then let her live," he said simply. "Let her fail and succeed, and get her feelings hurt, and make mistakes, and discover who she is when nobody's watching. That's what kids do." Victoria looked around the garage, at the organized chaos of real work, the calendar featuring a local diner, the radio playing classic rock at just the right volume, and envied Lucas's ability to find contentment in simplicity. The decision to enroll Olivia full-time at Cedar Falls Elementary felt like jumping off a cliff while blindfolded. Victoria spent 3 sleepless nights researching every possible scenario, from playground accidents to social rejection, before finally admitting that her daughter's happiness mattered more than her own peace of mind. The morning of Olivia's first full day, Victoria drove her to school instead of sending Mrs. Patterson, needing to witness this milestone personally. "Are you nervous, sweetheart?" she asked, as they approached the familiar brick building that would become Olivia's primary world. "A little," Olivia admitted, adjusting her backpack straps with careful precision. "But Zoe promised to show me where the good swings are, and Kevin saved me a seat at the art table." Victoria marveled at how casually her daughter mentioned these relationships, these connections that had formed naturally without corporate-level planning and risk assessment. "What if something goes wrong?" Victoria asked, voicing the fear that had kept her awake for weeks. Olivia considered this with 7-year-old wisdom, then reached over to pat her mother's hand with surprising gentleness. Then we'll figure it out together, she said, unconsciously echoing Lucas's approach to life's complications. That's what families do. The weeks that followed challenged every assumption Victoria had made about protection and love. Olivia came home with grass stains on her clothes, stories about playground politics, and artwork that reflected genuine childhood experiences rather than therapeutic exercises. She complained about homework, argued about bedtime, and asked for seconds at dinner. Normal childhood behaviors that Victoria realized she'd been unconsciously preventing through overprotection. Sarah Morrison invited me to her birthday party, Olivia announced one afternoon, waving a construction paper invitation decorated with glitter and ambitious unicorn drawings. It's at the skating rink, but Mrs. Chen says they have special skates that work with wheelchairs. Victoria's first instinct was to research wheelchair skating safety statistics, investigate the facility's accessibility compliance, and perhaps hire additional supervision. Instead, she took a deep breath and asked, "Do you want to go?" The simple question felt revolutionary. For 2 years, Victoria had been deciding what Olivia wanted based on medical recommendations and safety protocols. Now she was asking her daughter to express her own desires, trusting that a 7-year-old might actually know what would make her happy. Lucas received Victoria's call on a Thursday evening while helping Zoe with math homework that had devolved into a battle of wills over long division. "I need help," Victoria said without preamble, her voice carrying none of its usual polished confidence. "Olivia wants to have a sleepover with 3 friends from school, and I have absolutely no idea how to make that happen." The admission represented a complete reversal of their early dynamic, when Victoria's wealth and resources had made Lucas feel inadequate. Now she was asking a garage mechanic for advice about childhood logistics, because he understood something she'd forgotten: how to let children be children. "What specifically are you worried about?" Lucas asked, setting aside Zoe's math workbook to focus on what he suspected was Victoria's first real parenting crisis since the accident. "Everything," Victoria laughed, the sound carrying hysteria around the edges. "What if she gets hurt during the night, and I don't hear her? What if the other kids are uncomfortable around her wheelchair? What if they ask questions I don't know how to answer?" Lucas listened to her catalogue of fears, recognizing the desperate love underneath all that anxiety. "Kids are tougher than you think," he said gently. "And Olivia's tougher than most." The sleepover became Cedar Falls Elementary's social event of the season, with 4 second graders transforming the Sterling Mansion's formal living room into a fortress of blankets, sleeping bags, and enough snacks to sustain a small army. Victoria had initially planned to hover nearby, monitoring every interaction and ready to intervene at the first sign of discomfort. Instead, she found herself banished to the kitchen by Olivia herself, who'd developed surprising assertiveness about her independence. "Moms aren't allowed in the fort," Olivia explained with the serious authority of someone who'd been researching sleepover protocols. "But you can bring us popcorn in exactly 1 hour." Victoria retreated to her home office, trying to focus on quarterly reports, while the sounds of genuine childhood filtered through the mansion's usually pristine silence. Giggling, whispering, the occasional shriek of laughter noise she'd spent 2 years trying to control was now the sweetest sound she'd ever heard. Around midnight, she found herself peeking into the living room where 4 girls had finally succumbed to exhaustion, Olivia's wheelchair parked beside the blanket fort like a trusted companion rather than a medical device. Mrs. Patterson appeared beside her with maternal satisfaction. "Listen to that," the nurse whispered, indicating the gentle sounds of children sleeping peacefully. "That's the sound of healing." Spring arrived early in Cedar Falls, bringing with it Victoria's announcement that Sterling Dynamics would be establishing the Hope Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting families with disabled children. The decision represented everything Victoria had learned about the difference between protection and empowerment, between charity and community. "Too many families are struggling in isolation," she explained to the Portland Business Journal reporter who'd been documenting Sterling Dynamics' expansion into philanthropy. "We want to create connections, provide resources, and prove that disability doesn't mean inability." The Foundation's first initiative would be retrofitting Cedar Falls Elementary's playground with accessible equipment, ensuring that children like Olivia could participate fully in recess activities. But the real revolution was in Victoria's approach. Instead of funding solutions from her corporate tower, she'd embedded herself in the community, volunteering at school events and serving on the PTA with the same intensity she'd once reserved for hostile takeovers. Sterling actually helped with the book fair," Zoe reported to her father with obvious amazement. "She wore jeans and everything." Lucas smiled at his daughter's wonder, remembering his own surprise at discovering Victoria could exist outside her expensive armor. The Foundation's launch event took place on the same Saturday that marked 1 year since that fateful afternoon in Riverside Park. Victoria chose the venue deliberately, not Sterling Dynamics corporate headquarters, but the community center, where Cedar Falls families gathered for everything from wedding receptions to town halls. Local businesses donated food, parent volunteers decorated with streamlined efficiency, and the guest list included everyone from city council members to the crossing guard who'd learned to high-five Olivia every morning. Lucas watched Victoria work the room with the same commanding presence she brought to board meetings. But now her intensity was focused on genuine connection rather than corporate dominance. She knew the names of her daughter's classmates, could discuss carpool logistics with fluent expertise, and had somehow learned to make small talk about weekend soccer games and piano recitals. "She's become one of us," observed Mrs. Chen, Cedar Falls Elementary's longtime librarian who'd witnessed countless parents navigate the complex social dynamics of public school community. "Money can't buy that kind of belonging. You have to earn it through showing up," when Victoria had indeed shown up, trading her perfect control for messy authenticity and discovering that the latter was infinitely more valuable. The celebration reached its crescendo when Olivia took the microphone to address the crowd gathered in support of the Foundation's mission. Her 7-year-old voice carried clearly through the community center's acoustics as she looked out at faces that had become familiar over the months of school plays and art shows and playground adventures. "Before I started going to school here, I thought being different meant being alone," she began, her words carefully practiced but genuinely felt. "I lived in a really big house, but it felt empty because I didn't have any friends. My mom was trying to protect me from getting hurt, but she was protecting me from getting happy too." Victoria felt tears threaten as her daughter continued, each word a gentle indictment of the isolation she'd imposed with the best intentions. "Now I know that different just means interesting, and that friends don't care about wheelchairs, they care about whether you're nice and whether you share your cookies at lunch." The crowd laughed appreciatively, but Victoria heard the deeper truth underneath Olivia's simple observations. Community wasn't something you built with money or managed through careful planning. It was something you joined by showing up consistently and caring about people whose lives intersected with yours in ordinary, extraordinary ways. Lucas found Victoria after the event, when the community center had been restored to its normal configuration and the last volunteers had headed home to their own families. She sat alone at one of the round tables, still wearing her volunteer name tag and looking exhausted but peaceful in a way he'd never seen before. "Quite a year," he observed, settling into the chair beside her. Around them, the evidence of successful community gathering lingered: folded programs, scattered confetti, the lingering scent of coffee and celebration. "I was so afraid," Victoria admitted, her voice carrying the weight of everything she'd learned about love and letting go. "Afraid that if I wasn't controlling every variable, something terrible would happen to her. But the terrible thing was already happening. I was suffocating her with my protection." Lucas nodded, understanding the paradox that every parent eventually faces. The children we love most are the ones we have to release most completely. "She's thriving now," he pointed out, and Victoria's smile carried depths of gratitude he'd never witnessed in corporate success. "We both are," she corrected. "Turns out community is good medicine for everyone, not just kids." Through the community center's windows, Cedar Falls sparkled in the afternoon sunlight, an ordinary town filled with ordinary families doing the extraordinary work of raising children together. 18 months after a single dad's simple invitation changed 3 lives forever, Lucas and Victoria found themselves planning something neither had imagined possible: a future together built on shared values rather than shared circumstances. Their relationship had developed with the gradual inevitability of seasons changing, rooted in respect and watered by the daily intimacies of coordinated parenting. Marriage seemed less like a romantic gesture than a practical acknowledgement of what they'd already become: a family unit that functioned through collaboration rather than hierarchy. "The girls have been planning our wedding since February." Victoria laughed, showing Lucas the elaborate drawings Olivia and Zoe had created featuring flower girls, a wheelchair-accessible altar, and a reception where everyone got to dance, regardless of mobility. "Apparently they've decided we're taking too long to make it official." Lucas studied the artwork with the serious consideration it deserved, noting the careful details that represented a 7- and 8-year-old's understanding of love. Everyone smiling, everyone included, everyone celebrating together. "Smart kids," he observed. "They figured out what took us adults 18 months to realize." Victoria leaned against his shoulder, marveling at how natural it felt to share decision-making with someone who valued her daughter's happiness as much as she did. The wedding took place in Riverside Park on a perfect October afternoon, exactly 2 years after that first encounter beneath the ancient oak tree. Cedar Falls had turned out in force to celebrate the union that had somehow become the community's own success story. Proof that families could be created through choice rather than biology. That love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, when people chose courage over comfort. Olivia served as Zoe's co-maid of honor, both girls wearing matching purple dresses and flowers in their hair, their bond now unbreakable after months of sisterhood that transcended blood relations. Mrs. Patterson had flown in from Portland to witness the ceremony, her Scottish pragmatism unable to hide the maternal pride she felt watching Olivia participate fully in a celebration of joy. The pastor from Cedar Falls Community Church kept the ceremony simple and heartfelt, focusing on the promises Lucas and Victoria were making not just to each other, but to the family they'd created together through patience, trust, and the daily choice to put children's needs ahead of adult fears. "Marriage," he observed, "is like parenting. You figure it out together, one day at a time, with lots of grace for mistakes and even more celebration for small victories." The reception featured dancing under string lights, a potluck dinner that showcased Cedar Falls' finest casserole traditions, and enough community spirit to power the entire Pacific Northwest. Victoria danced with Lucas to a song they'd chosen together, something about building something beautiful from broken pieces, while Olivia and Zoe spun nearby in their wheelchairs and sneakers, respectively, their laughter adding percussion to the evening's soundtrack. Mike Torres from Morrison's Garage had closed shop early to attend, wearing his first tie in 15 years and proclaiming it worth the discomfort to witness the best thing to happen to this town since the interstate bypass. Mrs. Dartasans Chen presented the newlyweds with a photo album documenting their courtship through school events and community gatherings, evidence that their love story had unfolded in public, witnessed and supported by neighbors who'd invested in their success. As evening settled over the park, where everything began, Victoria looked around at the faces illuminated by fairy lights and realized this was what she'd been searching for without knowing it. Belonging that couldn't be purchased, only earned through the daily practice of showing up for people who mattered. The Sterling Martinez house on Riverside Drive represented the best of both worlds. Victoria's resources channeled into creating accessibility without sacrificing warmth. Lucas's insistence on practicality balanced with Victoria's appreciation for beauty. The kitchen featured professional-grade appliances and a breakfast nook where the family gathered each morning before school and work, the girls comparing homework assignments while their parents coordinated schedules over coffee that actually tasted like something more than caffeine delivery. Olivia's room showcased her artwork alongside adaptive technology, while Zoe's space reflected her evolving interests in science and literature. The house hummed with the comfortable chaos of a family that had learned to blend different backgrounds into shared purpose, where Sterling Dynamics board meetings coexisted with Morrison's garage overtime and elementary school volunteer commitments. "This feels like home," Olivia announced one evening during their weekly family dinner, and Victoria realized her daughter was right, not because of the house itself, but because of the people who filled it with laughter, argument, cooperation, and unconditional love. 2 years later, the Hope Foundation had expanded to serve 3 states, providing resources and community connections to thousands of families navigating disability with grace and determination rather than isolation and fear. Victoria had stepped back from day-to-day operations at Sterling Dynamics, choosing instead to focus on work that fed her soul rather than just her bank account. Lucas had become the Foundation's Director of Family Services, his practical wisdom and genuine empathy making him the perfect liaison between corporate resources and community needs. "We're not trying to fix anything," he explained to journalists who asked about the Foundation's mission. "We're trying to connect people who understand each other's challenges and celebrating the fact that different doesn't mean less than." The Foundation's success wasn't measured in dollars raised or programs launched, but in families who'd found their tribe, children who'd discovered their worth extended far beyond their limitations, and communities that had learned to see disability as diversity rather than deficit. Olivia had become something of a poster child for the Foundation's approach, but she wore the responsibility lightly, more interested in her 4th-grade science projects than her role as inspiration to adults who should have known better. The story might have ended there, with a family happily settled into their chosen life. But life rarely offers such tidy conclusions. Instead, it continued with the daily rhythms of ordinary extraordinariness. Parent. Teacher conferences and playground negotiations. Sibling squabbles and shared victories. The endless logistics of raising children who were growing into their own complicated, wonderful selves. Olivia had joined the school's robotics club and discovered a passion for engineering that surprised no one who'd watched her problem-solve accessibility challenges with creative determination. Zoe had developed interests in environmental science and social justice, inspired by her family's work with the foundation and her own observations about fairness and community responsibility. "They're going to change the world," Victoria observed one evening, watching her daughters collaborate on a project designed to make playgrounds more inclusive for children with various disabilities. "They already have," Lucas replied, thinking about all the families whose lives had been touched by a simple invitation to play in a sandbox 2 years earlier. The ripple effects of choosing connection over isolation continued expanding outward, creating waves of change that neither of them could have anticipated when they first decided to trust each other with their children's hearts. On quiet Sunday mornings, when the girls slept late and the house settled into peaceful silence, Victoria and Lucas often returned to Riverside Park for coffee and reflection. They sat on the bench near the oak tree where everything began, watching new families navigate the complex dance of childhood friendship and parental protection. Sometimes they'd spot a lonely child sitting apart from the action, and one of them would inevitably suggest walking over to make an introduction, to offer the gift of inclusion that had transformed their own lives. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met that day?" Victoria asked during one of these morning pilgrimages. Lucas considered the question seriously, watching early spring sunlight filter through new leaves on the ancient oak. "I think we would have found each other eventually," he said finally. "People who need what we needed usually find their way to each other, if they're paying attention." Victoria smiled, remembering the frightened, controlling mother she'd been just 2 years earlier, protecting her daughter from everything except happiness itself. "I'm grateful we didn't wait," she admitted. "I'm grateful for all of it, even the scary parts." They sat in comfortable silence, two parents who'd learned that love sometimes means stepping back, that protection sometimes requires vulnerability, and that the most important conversations often begin with the simplest words. "My daughter would love to play with you."